So again, it's very clear that the Treaty of Versailles was very harsh on the Germans. However, the Germans still did sign it in June of 1919, and this is one of the major reasons why you start to see increasing challenges towards this very new Weimar government. So, so conservatives in particular start to view this signing of the Treaty of Versailles as a stab in the back, which is what this little cartoon represents. Also, Diktat, which means the dictated peace, right? So, conservatives are arguing that that Germany was sort of exposing its vulnerability to the rest of Europe. That ultimately that by signing the Treaty of Versailles, the Weimar Republic was sort of doomed from the start. And the very next slide, we're going to talk about how there were a lot of reactions or challenges to the Weimar Republic from the right. Now, and the first one that we need to be familiar with is the Coup Push. Now, Putsch is just German for like a coup d'etat or a revolution, right? So in 1920, there is this group of conservative politicians and businessmen who also get help from some army officials who are, again, just disgruntled, upset with the Treaty of Versailles, upset with the Weimar Republic in general because they think it's too weak. And in the Coup Push, what they do is they take control of Berlin. All right, and then they declare a new government. Now remember that the actual government was located in Weimar at this time. We just looked at that in a map in the previous video. But at the same time, the Weimar Republic is vulnerable enough that, that establishing this new government in Berlin by conservatives was certainly a significant challenge to the Weimar rule. You also see that over in Bavaria, there is another group of right-wing conservatives that are taking control of that area. So again, you just see some significant right-wing challenges to the Weimar Republic. All right, so the chancellor, whose name was Ebert, decides to figure out a way to defend the Weimar Republic in the midst of these challenges. So one of the first things that he does is he implores workers to defend the Weimar Republic by striking. Right, so there's this general strike that results. So basically throughout the country, no matter where you are, the working class is striking. They're bringing all economic activities to a halt. And as we know, just just in history in general, no matter which country you're talking about, if all economic activities come to a halt, it's very difficult to make any sort of progress politically or in any other way. And so basically what the workers are actually doing is they're sort of purposely hurting their own economy, but the idea is that if they stop working, that they can also stop the putsch. So this actually does work, even though it is devastating, temporarily for the economy. But because the general strike caused the putsch to fail, it saves this young and vulnerable Weimar Republic. So what you're going to see is that the putsch shows us that conservatives start to realize that they may not be able to take power illegally, so they can't just seize it like they did in the putsch, but what they're realizing is that they can probably have more of an influence legally. So you're going to see that as a result of the Coup Push and another putsch that we'll talk about in a little while, they just start to campaign more effectively and gain more seats in the Reichstag, so basically establishing more power and influence over the government legitimately. You're also going to see that over time the SPD is going to withdraw from the government, and so you're going to have a more center-right coalition in charge. So again, that's another way that that the more leftist faction of the Weimar Republic is going to start to break down. All right, this is also really significant when we see the rise of the Nazi Party coming closer to World War II. Another reason why the Weimar Republic was very vulnerable is again because of the French. We discussed earlier that one of the really harsh provisions of the Treaty of Versailles was the reparations. According to the Treaty of Versailles, the Allies announced that Germany had to pay almost $34 billion in reparations, and just as a side note, this was something that Germany was not able to completely finish paying off until 2010. So basically, Germany's economy is too weak to actually be able to pay for these reparations. Germany asked for there to be a moratorium on the reparations, but the French don't like that. Interestingly, the British are okay with this moratorium, which makes sense given our previous discussion about John Maynard Keynes' idea that Europe should be less harsh on Germany economically. But nonetheless, since Germany basically is unable to pay the reparations, France decides to implement a strategy to try to force this payment, which is the Ruhr crisis. This area here is the Ruhr. This area in green is a very wealthy, industrial, productive portion of Germany. And so when the French send troops in and actually occupy the Ruhr, this is basically their way of just basically seizing production, trying to take capital from Germany because they're unable to get them to pay for it otherwise. Again, the way that Germany responds to this is more or less a strike. The Weimar Republic orders all the residents of the Ruhr to stop working. This is called passive resistance. All right, so again, by not working, obviously the Ruhr region isn't going to be producing anymore, and the French aren't going to be able to get their money. But nonetheless, Germany still has to figure out some sort of way to pay reparations, and this is going to have devastating effects on the value of currency. So basically, and we know this by now, this is a very bad strategy, but what Germany is doing to try to pay off its reparations is it is printing off more money. All right, this is going to result in some serious runaway inflation or hyperinflation. All right, we see by these statistics how rapid the inflation really was. In 1919, a dollar was worth approximately 9 Deutschmarks. By 1923, so just 4 years later, each dollar was worth 4.2 trillion Deutschmarks. Okay, so you see people literally, their money was so worthless that they were doing things like making wallpaper out of it. Here you see children actually playing with money, using them as building blocks, right? So I mean, literally just the value of the Deutschmark completely collapsed. And this is also going to make a lot of social classes very upset, in particular the middle class and the retired population, so the people who had capital, the people who had a certain amount of money that at the time, was perfectly adequate to help them survive, suddenly wasn't worth it. So retired populations are a really great example. So say, you're not generating any income anymore. And you saved up quite a bit of money that's supposed to be able to pay for your retirement. Now suddenly if there's rapid inflation, the amount of money that you've saved away is not increasing, right? So say you put away $1 million towards retirement, that $1 million is still $1 million even if it is worth so much less. So basically the retired population is really going to struggle because of this hyperinflation. Also the middle class to a certain extent, because again, they are the owners of capital, so suddenly they're going to find that the amount of money that they've had tucked away is worth much less. What you're finding actually is that the working class is affected a little bit less by this hyperinflation, because when there is inflation, your wages tend to go up. So what this is going to result in is that there are going to be some serious scapegoating. There's going to be some serious scapegoating taking place. In particular, the more conservatives, the people who are affected directly by this runaway inflation, are going to start to, first of all, blame the government, the Weimar government, which they think is arguably is not doing enough, obviously, to control inflation and not doing enough to protect the middle classes. They're also blaming large businesses. They're blaming the working class, and even more significantly, they're blaming Jews and communists. So you're going to see that that some of these more conservative people are actually going to look for some sort of more radical answer to their government's problems. And so when someone like Adolf Hitler comes along, they're going to be very excited about the possibility that he can kind of bring the German government out of its economic crises and also establish a more solid, effective leadership. Okay, so speaking of Hitler, he does attempt to take control early on in 1923, but he is unsuccessful at the beginning. So the first time we really see Hitler on the scene is in the Beer Hall Putsch of 1923. So again, like the Coup Push, it is an attempt from the right to take control of the Weimar Republic. All right, so Adolf Hitler, along with his emerging Nazi party, which at this point is not particularly powerful, but it will grow rapidly, and we will talk about that in the next chapter, they are going to try to overthrow the state of Bavaria, but they're going to fail. Hitler and some of his co-conspirators will be arrested and sentenced to a year in jail. It is when Hitler is in jail that he writes Mein Kampf, which basically becomes the Bible for the goals of the Nazi Party and how to, in his mind, rebuild Germany. And interestingly, because he only gets a 1-year sentence, right? This already shows us that there are influencers in the law that are relatively conservative, right? You know, literally attempting to overthrow the government, you would think would warrant a much more severe punishment. But Hitler gets off with just a 1-year punishment. So this kind of shows us already that the government might be shifting more towards sympathizing with the right. Another thing that this beer hall putsch is going to signify is that because Hitler fails to actually institute a coup, he's going to realize that the way that he needs to gain power is legitimately, right? He's going to have to run for office. He is going to actually have to get a mandate, have to get elected in order to rise to power, which eventually is exactly what he does. Okay, so Germany is going to experience a little bit of recovery before the Great Depression strikes. So part of this is because of the new chancellor. In 1923, August 1923, we are going to see Gustaf Trestman become chancellor. And the significant accomplishments that he makes in particular is that he's going to restore Germany's relationship with the rest of Europe. Remember, as a result of the Treaty of Versailles, Germany is still very much the antagonist in this situation. But we're going to see that he is going to significantly repair these relations. Remember that as a result of the Ruhr crisis, you had that passive resistance. You had all these workers who were basically doing nothing to prevent France from making any money. Gustaf Trestman calls off that passive resistance, and he also agrees to pay reparations towards the Allies. However, he does acknowledge that that there needs to be some sort of reconsideration as to how Germany can, how able Germany is to pay the reparations, just because, again, its economy is suffering. But at the same time, they do not deny that they need to pay them, right? So I guess you could kind of see it as like refinancing a mortgage, but at the same time, they are acknowledging that they still owe the money. All right, you're going to see that Gustaf Trestman gets a lot of support from the Social Democrats. So again, you know, we're not yet completely turning towards conservatism like we will closer to 1933, that is, with the rise of the Nazi Party. You're also going to see that basically under Trestman's leadership, Germany's status is going to be virtually normal in the European community with this agreement called the Locarno Pact, which we'll talk about in just a moment. Okay, so again, how does Gustaf Trestman improve the relationship between Germany and the rest of Europe? Actually, I think just because this will take a little bit more than 2 minutes to do and we're running short on time, I'm going to stop this video and start a new one to explain these new relationships.